Combat Medic Sergeant Daniel Cross had seen worse battles, but not by much. The defensive position was holding barely, against wave after wave of raiders attacking the strategic waypoint. Human and Valtherin forces fought side by side, the alliance between species tested by fire and blood. Daniel moved through the chaos with practiced efficiency, treating wounded wherever he found them. Coalition soldiers, Valtherin warriors. He didn't distinguish. Wounded was wounded, and his job was to keep them alive long enough to reach proper medical facilities. He was working on a human sergeant with shrapnel wounds when he heard the distinctive sound of Valtherin combat armor hitting the ground hard. He looked up and saw a warrior down about 20 meters away, surrounded by enemy fire. The armor markings were elaborate, high rank, possibly command level, and the warrior wasn't moving. Daniel's training overrode his survival instinct. He grabbed his medical kit and ran toward the fallen warrior, keeping low as weapons fire streaked overhead. Coalition soldiers provided covering fire, but it was still insanely dangerous. He reached the warrior and immediately assessed critical wounds, massive trauma to the torso where armor had been breached, bleeding heavily. Valtherin physiology was different from human, but Daniel had cross-species medical training for exactly this situation. He worked fast, establishing pressure on the worst bleeding, administering medications adapted for Valtherin biology, assessing which organs were damaged and which could be stabilized with field treatment. The warrior was female, he noted distantly. Young by Valtherin standards, with the distinctive facial markings that indicated high bloodline. Her armor, now that he could see it up close, bore symbols he'd seen in cultural briefings. Royalty. He was treating a Valtherin princess, or noble, or something politically important. That realization lasted about 3 seconds before his training reasserted itself. She was wounded and dying, and her rank didn't matter compared to keeping her alive. Daniel worked for what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes. The wounds were severe, penetrating trauma that had damaged what Valtherin physiology used as primary circulation organs. He had to work carefully, using techniques adapted for Valtherin anatomy, monitoring her vital signs with equipment calibrated for her species. His hands were covered in her blood. Valtherin blood had a distinctive golden shimmer that marked it as different from human. He was so focused on stabilizing her that he didn't notice the battle sounds fading, didn't register that the immediate area around him had gone quiet. Finally, her vital signs stabilized. Still critical, still needing advanced medical care, but no longer actively dying. Daniel sat back on his heels, exhausted, and only then did he notice his surroundings. Valtherin warriors surrounded him in a protective circle, their weapons facing outward. The enemy had been driven back or eliminated, and standing just beyond the circle of warriors was a figure in ornate armor that even Daniel, with his limited cultural knowledge, recognized as marking the highest authority. Queen Atara, ruler of the Valtherin Dominion. He'd seen her image in alliance briefings but never expected to encounter her on a battlefield. She was tall even by Valtherin standards, carrying herself with authority that transcended mere rank. Her armor was ceremonial and functional simultaneously, and her face showed controlled emotion as she looked at the warrior Daniel had just stabilized. The queen approached, her guards moving aside to let her through. She knelt beside the wounded warrior, examining her condition with evident medical knowledge, then looked at Daniel. "You saved her," Queen Atara said, and her voice carried weight that suggested this was more than simple observation. "Yes, Your Majesty," Daniel responded, defaulting to protocol despite his exhaustion. "She was critically wounded. I provided emergency stabilization. She needs advanced medical care, but her condition is no longer immediately life-threatening." The Queen's gaze moved to Daniel's hands, still covered in golden-shimmered blood. Her expression shifted in a way Daniel couldn't interpret. "You touched royal blood," the Queen said quietly, but her voice carried across the assembled warriors. You held the life of our heir in your hands. You chose preservation over abandonment, healing over indifference. You have fulfilled the Cor'vath. Daniel had no idea what that meant, but something in the Queen's tone suggested it was significant. One of the Valtherin warriors, an officer based on his insignia, stepped forward. Your Majesty, the human would not have known. He acted from his species' medical protocols, not from understanding of our sacred laws. Understanding is not required for the Cor'vath, Queen Atara said, standing. She looked at Daniel directly. You have touched royal blood in the act of preservation. You have restored life to the heir of our throne through direct physical contact. By the law of Cor'vath, the life debt, you are now bound to this bloodline. Daniel tried to process this while his medic brain was still focused on his patient. Your Majesty, I don't understand. You will marry my daughter. The pronouncement was clear and absolute. Daniel stared at the Queen, trying to understand if he'd heard correctly. Princess Kael, the Queen continued, gesturing to the warrior Daniel had just saved, is my heir. You saved her life through direct intervention, touching her blood, holding her life in your hands during her moment of ultimate vulnerability. The Cor'vath, our most sacred law, states that one who preserves royal life through such intimate contact becomes bound to that life. Marriage formalizes this bond, ensures loyalty, creates unity that cannot be broken. Your Majesty, I was just doing my job. I'm a combat medic. I save lives. I had no idea I was triggering any cultural laws. Before the Queen could respond, the tactical situation changed. Enemy forces launched another assault, and the temporary calm shattered. Warriors returned to defensive positions. The Queen was escorted to safety, and Daniel found himself back in the chaos of combat medicine. But the Queen's words echoed in his mind even as he worked. You will marry my daughter. The battle was won by nightfall. Enemy forces retreated, the defensive position held, and casualty counts were calculated. Princess Kael was transported to advanced medical facilities and was expected to make full recovery thanks to Daniel's battlefield intervention. Daniel hoped the chaos would make everyone forget the Queen's pronouncement. He was wrong. The next day, he was summoned to what amounted to a field court, a formal assembly of Valtherin warriors and commanders in a secured area behind the front lines. Queen Atara presided, seated on a makeshift throne that somehow still conveyed absolute authority. Princess Kael was there too, standing beside her mother. She looked recovered. Valtherin healing was impressive, though bandages still showed where Daniel's field surgery had been necessary. She wore formal armor rather than combat gear, and her expression was carefully neutral. Daniel's commanding officer was also present, looking uncomfortable in ways that suggested this situation had already been discussed at levels far above Daniel's rank. Queen Atara spoke with formal weight. This assembly recognizes that combat medic Sergeant Daniel Cross has fulfilled the Cor'vath, the life debt, through his actions in preserving the life of Princess Kael, heir to our throne. He touched royal blood in the act of preservation, restored royal life through direct intervention, and by our most sacred law is now bound to our bloodline. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the assembled Valtherin warriors who showed no surprise at this pronouncement. He will marry Princess Kael to formalize this bond, to unite our bloodlines, to demonstrate the loyalty and commitment created when one holds royal life in their hands and chooses preservation. Daniel's commanding officer cleared his throat. Your Majesty, with all respect to Valtherin customs, Sergeant Cross is a human military medic. His actions were based on his training and duty to preserve life. He had no knowledge of your cultural laws and no intent to bind himself to your royal bloodline. Intent is irrelevant to the Cor'vath, Queen Atara replied calmly. The law exists to ensure that one who touches royal blood in such intimate way, who holds royal life in their hands during moment of ultimate vulnerability, is bound permanently to that life. It creates loyalty that cannot be broken, ensures the protector remains committed to the protected. unites bloodlines through sacred bond that transcends temporary political alliances. Daniel spoke up, trying to keep his voice respectful. Your Majesty, I understand you have laws I wasn't aware of, but I'm a human combat medic. I save lives. That's my job, my training, my purpose. I didn't intend to bind myself to your bloodline or marry your daughter. I just saw someone dying and did what I'm trained to do, stop the dying. And in doing so, you fulfilled the Cor'vath, the Queen said. You acted with courage under fire, with skill that preserved life, with compassion that saw a person rather than a political symbol. These actions created a bond our law treats as sacred. To refuse the Cor'vath now is to declare that the life you saved has no value, that the bond created through blood and preservation is meaningless. It would be grave insult not just to my family, but to our entire people. Princess Kael spoke for the first time, her voice carrying quiet strength. Mother, he saved my life without knowledge of our laws. He acted from his species' protocols and his own compassion. Perhaps we should allow him to return to his people, rather than forcing ancient customs on someone who doesn't understand or accept them. The Queen's expression softened slightly when looking at her daughter, but her voice remained firm. The law does not require understanding or acceptance, only fulfillment. And the Cor'vath serves practical purpose beyond tradition. Daughter, our alliance with humanity is fragile, built on political necessity rather than deep bonds. This marriage would strengthen that alliance immeasurably. It would bind our peoples more closely, would demonstrate commitment beyond mere treaties. It would show both our peoples that unity is possible, that bonds formed through courage and preservation matter more than species differences. Daniel realized with sinking certainty that this wasn't just about cultural law. It was about politics. He was being used to cement an alliance between species, and he had no way to refuse without creating a diplomatic incident that could damage human-Valtherin relations. The Queen continued, You have 3 days to prepare for the bonding ceremony. During this time, you may learn about our customs, speak with Princess Kael, and come to understand the honor being offered to you. But understand this clearly. The Cor'vath is binding. You will marry my daughter. The only question is whether you do so willingly, understanding the sacred nature of the bond, or whether we must proceed despite your reluctance. She stood, signaling the assembly was concluded. 3 days, Sergeant Cross, use them wisely. As the Valtherin dispersed, Daniel's commanding officer pulled him aside. This is a mess. The Alliance staff is freaking out about diplomatic implications. We can't force you into marriage, but we also can't afford to insult the Valtherin by rejecting their sacred law. So, what are my options? Officially, accept the marriage. Unofficially, the commander lowered his voice. If you wanted to disappear before the ceremony, if you happened to get extracted for urgent medical consultation back at headquarters, it could probably be arranged. We'd deal with the diplomatic fallout, blame it on communication errors or emergency protocols. You'd be free, and we'd manage the Valtherin somehow. Daniel appreciated the offer, even as he recognized its problems. That would damage the alliance. Maybe, or maybe the Valtherin would accept that forcing ancient laws on unknowing humans isn't sustainable policy. Either way, you have options. Think about them. Daniel was given quarters in the Valtherin encampment, comfortable rooms that felt more like honored guest accommodations than prisoner cells, but guards were definitely present. He wasn't technically prevented from leaving, but the unspoken message was clear. Don't test the boundaries right now. He spent the first day trying to process his situation. He could flee. His commanding officer had made that clear. Disappear before the ceremony. Let the diplomatic corps deal with the consequences. Return to his normal life as a combat medic, treating wounded and moving from battle to battle. Or he could accept this forced marriage to an alien princess in a culture he didn't understand, bound by laws he'd triggered accidentally while doing his job. On the second day, Princess Kael requested to speak with him privately. They met in a secured garden area. Valtherin military encampments apparently included green spaces for meditation, with guards maintaining respectful distance. Kael approached with controlled grace that reminded Daniel she was royalty even without the elaborate armor. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I don't think I had much choice," Daniel said, then immediately regretted the bitterness in his tone. "I'm sorry, this situation is just overwhelming, unfair. Built on laws you never agreed to." Kael smiled slightly. "I understand, better than you might think." She gestured to a bench and they both sat. "I want you to know that I didn't ask for this. I appreciate you saving my life. I would have died without your intervention. But I don't expect you to bind yourself to me forever because of it. If you want to leave, I'll speak to my mother. I'll argue that forcing the Cor'vath on someone who doesn't accept our laws is contrary to its spirit." Daniel studied her. "Why would you do that? Doesn't this marriage benefit you politically? It benefits our alliance with humanity. It benefits my mother's political goals for unifying our peoples. But it forces you into a union you never chose. And I've lived too long with duty overriding choice to want to impose that on someone else." She looked out at the garden, her expression distant. "I was married before. An arranged political marriage to a Valtherin noble, Lord Commander Valtherin, meant to unite my mother's royal line with his family's military influence. We were married for 5 years before he was killed in combat 2 years ago. I'm sorry for your loss. Don't be. Valtherin was a good man, a capable commander, someone I respected, but I never chose him. I spent 5 years in a marriage I hadn't chosen, trying to make the best of a duty-bound partnership with someone I respected but never loved. When he died, I grieved for the waste of a good life ended too soon, but I didn't grieve for lost love because that love never existed." Kael turned to look at Daniel directly. "I don't want that again, and I don't want to force it on you. You saved my life through courage and skill, and I'm grateful. But gratitude isn't a foundation for marriage, and ancient law isn't a substitute for genuine choice. If you want to leave, I'll support that decision even if it costs me politically." Daniel felt something shift in his perception of her, from political figure to actual person. "What do you want? Not what your mother wants or what benefits the alliance. What do you want?" Kael was quiet for a long moment. "I want our alliance with humanity to remain strong because I believe unity between our species serves both our interests. I want the Cor'vath to mean something genuine rather than just being legal compulsion. I want you to choose freely rather than being trapped by laws you didn't know existed." She paused, then added quietly, "But I also understand if that free choice is to leave. I'll support whatever you decide, and I'll argue to my mother that forcing someone into sacred bonds against their will makes those bonds meaningless." "Tell me about the Cor'vath," Daniel said. "Your mother said it's about ensuring loyalty, creating unbreakable bonds. Why does your culture need such a law?" "Because our history is full of betrayals," Kael said bluntly. "Royal guards who turned on those they were meant to protect. Court physicians who poisoned rather than cured. Advisors who had intimate access to royalty, using that access for assassination or manipulation. We learned that those who have opportunity to harm royalty in their most vulnerable moments, when wounded, when unconscious, when their blood is exposed, must be bound through unbreakable loyalty. The Cor'vath addresses this by turning vulnerability into bond. When someone touches royal blood in the act of preservation, when they hold royal life literally in their hands and choose to save rather than harm, that creates a connection our culture treats as sacred. The marriage formalizes that connection, ensures the protector remains loyal, binds their fate to ours so that harming us would harm themselves. So I'm being bound to you to make sure I don't become a threat. You're being bound to me because our law says that bond already exists. The moment you touched my blood, held my life in your hands, chose to preserve rather than harm, that created a connection that transcends intent or knowledge. The marriage just makes that connection legally and socially recognized, transforms personal bond into public commitment. Daniel absorbed this. And the political aspect. Your mother was pretty clear this is about strengthening the human Valtherin alliance. That's true too. The Cor'vath serves multiple purposes, ensures loyalty, creates sacred bonds, and yes, unites bloodlines in ways that serve political goals. My mother sees your marriage to me as opportunity to demonstrate that humans and Valtherin can be truly unified, that our alliance can go deeper than treaties and tactical cooperation. Kael's expression was serious. She's not wrong about that value. A human married into our royal line would be a powerful symbol, would encourage both our peoples to see each other as potential partners rather than just convenient allies. It could change how both species approach cooperation. But that doesn't mean you should be forced into it, she added quickly. Political benefits don't justify coercion, which is why I'm offering you freedom if you want it. Leave before the ceremony and I'll manage the diplomatic consequences. Daniel spent the third day thinking about his choice. He could flee, return to his normal life, let others deal with the diplomatic mess. It would be easy, defensible, and no one could really blame him for refusing to be trapped in a forced marriage. But he kept thinking about his conversation with Kael, about her honesty, her offer of freedom even though it would cost her politically, her own experience with duty-bound marriages, about the Cor'vath and what it represented, not just coercion, but recognition of bonds created through courage and preservation. He thought about the alliance between humans and Valtherin, fragile, built on necessity, valuable but not yet deep. He thought about what Queen Atara had said, that this marriage could change how both species saw each other, could demonstrate unity was possible. He thought about Kael herself, brilliant, honest, carrying the weight of duty with grace, offering him freedom when she could have demanded compliance. And he realized something. He didn't want to leave, not because he was afraid of diplomatic consequences or because he felt obligated by ancient law, but because he was genuinely intrigued by Kael, by the possibility of building something meaningful from this unexpected beginning. Because fleeing would be easy, but staying and trying to make something real from this forced start, that would be an act of courage comparable to treating a wounded princess under fire. He told his commanding officer his decision. He was staying and accepting the marriage. "You're sure?" the commander asked. "This isn't just you sacrificing yourself for the alliance." "I'm sure, not because I think I have no choice, but because I'm choosing to see where this leads." Kael offered me freedom, which paradoxically made me want to stay. She's not demanding this. Her mother is. And I think there's potential here to build something genuine if we both choose to try. The bonding ceremony was elaborate. Valtherin rituals Daniel barely understood even with Kael quietly guiding him through the steps. Exchange of ceremonial weapons symbolizing mutual protection. Ritual mixing of blood to represent the bond created through preservation. Vows spoken in formal Valtherin that Daniel had practiced phonetically. When they reached the final exchange, traditional words about duty and honor, Daniel added something not in the script. "I'm accepting this bond not because law compels me, but because I choose to. Because you saved my life as much as I saved yours, by offering me freedom when you could have demanded compliance. I choose you, Kael. Not because the Cor'vath requires it, but because I want to see what we can build together. Because bonds formed through courage and healing matter more than species differences, and I want to prove that's true." Kael's eyes showed surprise and something that might have been hope. She responded, also departing from the script. "And I choose you. Not because my mother declared it or because ancient law binds us, but because you acted with courage and compassion when I was dying, and you're acting with equal courage now by choosing to stay when you could flee. I choose to build genuine partnership with you rather than just accepting duty-bound obligation. I choose to prove that the Cor'vath can create real bonds, not just legal ones." Queen Atara, presiding over the ceremony, showed subtle approval. After the formal rituals concluded, she approached Daniel privately. When I declared you would marry my daughter, you saw it as coercion. And perhaps it was. I gave you little choice because I believed the bond was sacred and the political value was significant. But you chose to stay and make something real from that forced beginning. That speaks well of your character and suggests the Cor'vath was wise in binding you to our bloodline. The months that followed showed Daniel and Kael building genuine partnership from their forced beginning. Daniel learned Valtherin culture, studied their military tactics, became trusted advisor to Kael on human perspectives and coalition relations. His medical expertise was valued, his combat experience respected, his insights into human thinking useful for the alliance. Kael learned about human medicine and combat protocols, valued Daniel's perspectives on tactical operations, and found that the partnership she thought would be another duty-bound obligation was becoming something real. She discovered that Daniel's humor was dry and well-timed, that his dedication to preserving life went deeper than just training, that he treated her as partner rather than as obligation. They discovered compatibility neither had expected. Daniel's tactical thinking complemented Kael's strategic planning. Her knowledge of Valtherin politics helped him navigate the complex court dynamics he'd been thrust into. His outsider perspective helped her see solutions to problems her cultural assumptions had hidden. 6 months after their marriage, there was an assassination attempt. Valtherin rivals who saw Kael's marriage to a human as weakness, as dilution of their bloodline, tried to eliminate her during what should have been a secure diplomatic function. Daniel's combat training identified the threat before it materialized. Something in the positioning of guards, the timing of server movements, triggered his threat assessment instincts. He got Kael to safety seconds before poison was deployed in a way that would have killed her, and made it look like allergic reaction to human-introduced foods. The investigation revealed a conspiracy by traditionalist Valtherin nobles, who opposed the alliance with humans and saw Kael's marriage as betrayal of Valtherin purity. The plot was extensive and had nearly succeeded. The Cor'vath law, meant to ensure loyalty through sacred bonds, proved true. Daniel protected Kael not because law required it, but because she'd become someone he genuinely cared about, someone whose safety mattered to him beyond duty or obligation. After the assassination attempt, both human and Valtherin leadership realized the marriage had created exactly what Queen Atara intended. A bond that went beyond political convenience, that demonstrated unity between species, was possible when built on genuine care rather than just tactical necessity. Human Coalition Command began seeing Valtherin as true partners rather than just convenient allies. Valtherin nobles who'd opposed the alliance saw that humans could be integrated into their culture, that bonds between species could be as sacred as bonds within species. The marriage became a symbol, proof that courage and healing could create connections that changed both worlds, that forced beginnings could become genuine partnerships through mutual choice, that the Cor'vath could recognize truths about bonding that transcended cultural understanding. Years later, when asked about the moment Queen Atara declared he would marry her daughter, Daniel always gave an honest answer. "I saved Princess Kael's life because she was dying and I'm a medic. That's what we do." I had no idea I was triggering ancient law or binding myself to Valtherin royalty. When the Queen declared I would marry Kael, I felt trapped by laws I didn't understand and coerced into a future I hadn't chosen. He would pause, then continue, but I stayed not because I felt I had no choice, but because I chose to see what could be built from that beginning. Kael offered me freedom when she could have demanded compliance, and that act of giving me choice made me want to choose to stay. We built genuine partnership from forced beginning through mutual effort and respect. The Cor'vath brought us together, but we made the relationship real through choosing each other beyond what law required. And when Kael was asked about marrying a human who'd saved her life, her answer reflected similar honesty. "Daniel saved my life through courage and skill, accidentally triggering our sacred law." My mother declared the Cor'vath binding, effectively forcing him into marriage with me. I offered him freedom because I didn't want to force on him what I'd experienced myself, duty-bound marriage without genuine choice. She would smile. But he chose to stay, not because law required it or because he felt obligated, but because he wanted to see if we could build something real. We proved that the Cor'vath can create genuine bonds when both people choose to make them genuine. We showed that courage and healing can unite species in ways that change both worlds, that forced beginnings can become chosen partnerships through mutual respect and effort. Their children, human Valtherin hybrids who carried traits of both species, grew up as living symbols of unity between peoples. They represented the possibility that bonds formed through courage and preservation could transcend species differences, that sacred laws could recognize profound truths about connection even when triggered accidentally. The marriage became foundational to deeper human Valtherin cooperation. Other marriages followed, not all bound by the Cor'vath, but encouraged by the example of unity that Daniel and Kael represented. Military cooperation deepened, cultural exchange programs expanded, and both species began seeing each other as genuine partners rather than just tactical allies. But for Daniel and Kael, the broader implications mattered less than the personal reality. They had taken a forced beginning and made it real. They had transformed coercion into choice,